Okay, hello and welcome to the second episode of True Crime Murder Mystery with Haley and Mary-Margret. I'm Mary Margaret.
And I'm Haley, and we are so happy to be back with you today to tell another tale. Today we'll be diving into a juicy one.
So
What was that?
last time I told the story and Haley was completely fresh, and this time Haley's the expert and she will be weaving this tale for me. So I'm excited. Take it away, Hale.
So before we get started, just want to remind everyone to follow, subscribe to our channel. That way you are notified every time we release a new episode. And I know you guys love to stay up to date with us. So do so if you are interested or so obliged. So without further ado, let's just jump right into it. Setting the scene, it's 12:20 a.m. on June 1st of 98. The 911 call center in Reno, Nevada receives a call from this distraught male.
Sir, I need you to calm down. Where are you?
I'm on the side of the mountain, off the hills. My car's rolled down the hill.
What kind of a vehicle is it?
It's a Ford truck. Yeah, I was thrown out. I'm flying down the hill. I'm trying to hang on with one arm. I can't hang on. I'm flying down the hill.
The male tells the dispatchers that he and his wife had a bad accident on a slide mountain near Lake Tahoe.
Every time I'm driving in the mountains, that's my biggest fear,
Yeah.
is going over that guardrail.
Yeah, and that's what I feel like your parents teach you when you're younger is slow down on those turns. So this man is calling in, and when they ask him if he's injured, he says that his back, he has some injuries in his back, his ankle hurts pretty badly, his head's a little bit injured, but he does not think that he's bleeding. So a little shortly after, 3 patrol officers arrive on the scene, and they discover this massive hole in the guardrail. And next they kind of see a man lying on his side nearby, surrounded by shrubs and rocks on the steep slope about 80 feet below the roadside. And just as they kind of come up on this man, a life flight helicopter that had been dispatched just before shines its light about 700 feet further down the side of the steep mountain, revealing this Ford F-150, this blue Ford 1997 F-150 pickup truck.
So the car was 700
feet down, yes,
feet away from him or from the road?
From off the side of the mountain. So he's kind of laying flat on the top. And yes. And so obviously the officers look at this and they're like, there's no way that anyone survives this. So just as kind of a sideway, Slide Mountain is actually gets its name from having tons of slides, physical slides. So rock sliding off the side of the mountain, mud sliding off the side of the mountain.
So these are landslides?
Yes. So now the officers are trying to get down to the actual truck. They found this man. The man's obviously telling them that his wife is down in this truck. Takes them about 20 minutes just to get down there. So once they arrive to the truck, they find, the female passenger still in the car, hanging upside down and partially strapped in with her seatbelt. They, quickly pry open the door, try to check for a pulse, and there is nothing. She is dead. So after kind of calling in for backup, they are able to cut her out of the seatbelt and put her body onto a ledge nearby. While this is all happening, her husband, he's shouting, she's in the car, I think she's dead. He's kind of just going on repeat, my wife, I think she's dead, she's in the car. Obviously,
probably
as one would be. Yeah, I think just as anyone would be in that situation. Yeah. I mean, it's one thing when you get into a car accident and you can, hope that everyone's okay. But when it comes to diving headfirst off the side of the mountain.
Yeah, and you can't even see your car or what the wreckage looks like, and you just have no idea what's happened. That's so scary.
No clue. By 1:15, shortly after, there are over 20 law enforcement on the scene and medical personnel, trying to tend and kind of figure out what was going on. So the man is quickly identified as Peter Bergna. He had been placed on a stretcher and, dragged up the road just because, as we mentioned before, he had a few injuries, wasn't necessarily bleeding, but was in pain. And the deceased female passenger is his wife, and her name was Renette Bergna. As we continue, Peter was examined by the nurse that had come in on the helicopter, stabilized, and then helicoptered out of there into the valley below. And everyone, I guess, on the scene can agree that it was incredible that Peter was alive and in this kind of situation, especially after this horrible and tragic accident.
So he was driving the car?
Yes, Peter was driving the car.
My first thought is, how did he get out of the car if he was driving? And I don't know, how do you get out of the car at the top of the mountain when it starts going over the edge? Because was he found anywhere, like, down the mountain? Or was he at the top where the road was?
No, he's found on the side by the guardrail. So
see, that's confusing to me, but I mean, that I don't know enough information yet, so I'm not going to be too sus. But he's 80 feet below the guardrail. Okay, so he must have tumbled out.
He had a little bit to him, but let's talk 80 feet and let's talk 700 feet. So
yeah,
that's
a very big difference. I don't know, maybe because this is in the 90s. So my first thought is maybe he's not wearing his seatbelt and he can see it's going south and immediately throws himself out of the car. But yeah, I don't know. I'm very curious to see how they put this one together.
Definitely feasible.
I want to know what he has to say.
Yeah.
And I feel so sad for Renee. That would be so terrifying to be in a car that's plummeting down a mountain and you're not.
Yeah.
Not that you could do anything anyway, but you're not even in the driver's seat. Like you can't. There's no illusion of control. That's so horrible.
So kind of as the dust continues to settle at around 10 a.m., the crash investigators actually arrive on the scene and, they start taking photos, measurements of the accident site, regular protocol. State troopers are kind of figuring out how they were going to recover the truck from where it had ended up 700 feet below. So a car drives up to the scene, and to everyone's surprise, Peter actually steps out of the vehicle on the passenger side. He's on crutches and he's kind of leaning over on that ankle, but appears to have suffered no really outward exterior cuts or scratches from the rocks on the side of the cliff, which is, interesting at first. And it was immediately clear that, Peter wasn't coming back to be talk about his wife, because the wife was still there in the body bag at the time, because they were still kind of surveying the scene, taking down notes, getting measurements. So he wasn't there to. Her body is at the crime scene, correct?
How many
in
hours
a body
has
bag?
It been?
I don't know the exact hours. It seems like it's between 1:15 a.m. and 10 a.m. So Peter returns and he's not there to see the body, though. Peter actually. This is my favorite part of the story. Peter instead is asking the individuals on the scene if anyone had found his missing fanny pack that he had lost in the process of this accident.
So that's his number one concern is, where's the fanny pack at? What is in that fanny pack?
Where is the fanny pack?
Necessary. That reminds me of the first season of White Lotus, where those girls are looking for their bag. What's he got in there?
So this is obviously a little bit alarming. He stays a few minutes before he just gets back in his vehicle and leaves without even noticing the body bag that his wife is in.
Wow.
Less than an hour later, 4 police officers arrive at the Bergnes Chalet style house in Incline Village. And Incline Village is just a 15-30 minute drive down from Slide Mountain. It's just the village kind of at the base of this mountain. And so the word of the accident had been spreading pretty quickly around town, as assumed. Friends were coming to the house, consoling Peter, really trying to be there for him, obviously, during this really difficult time. So eventually the officers have Peter come down to the station to answer some questions about what had happened the night before. I assume they were kind of giving him some time to just process the situation. So they bring him in. His friends are kind of telling him that he should continue to rest, but Peter's like, you know what? No, he says specifically, I'm going in. I feel it's my duty. As the officers are bringing Bergna in for questioning. They ask if they could have the clothes he was wearing the night before. He immediately retrieves this plastic bag that the nurses had given him that contained the clothes when he was discharged earlier that morning. So after he gives them the clothes, they head down to the Washoe County Sheriff's Department substation located in Incline Village, where their house is. So once in this meeting room, the officers tell Bergna that they'll be making an audio recording of this, of the questioning, of the interview. And, you know, as usual, our guy Peter is totally cool with this, wants to, you know, help in any way that he can. Peter begins to tell officers that Renette, his deceased wife, had actually just been in Italy for 6 weeks, and he was super excited to pick her up at the Reno Tahoe International Airport, also about 30-ish or so minutes away from Incline Village. So he heads to the airport and he meets Delta Flight 803 at the gate around 10:15-ish. Gives his wife a huge hug, and then drives up Mount Rose Highway towards the couple's Incline Village home. So at some point, he says, they decided to actually take a detour and drive to this scenic overlook, look at the lights kind of overseeing on the valley, and talk about their marriage. He says it's a favorite spot of theirs. And then he tells officers that I'm a lonely guy. So he's kind of, you know, talking about his marriage, but maybe alluding to this part of him that, you know, is not fulfilled by it or was not fulfilled by it.
He was in Italy for 6 weeks, so I can maybe understand. I don't know why she was there, but that can leave someone, the other half, feeling a little lonely. And even when you're with someone all the time, sometimes, if you're not connecting as well as you can still feel lonely even when you're around people. I wonder what they were talking about in their marriage, if they had some marital issues that they needed to talk about.
I think it's interesting that he's also saying, like, he's lonely, like, you know, he's not lonely because he just lost his wife. He's talking more so like, I'm just a lonely guy in general. So that's kind of interesting. So obviously officers are interested in a little bit more about Renette, just as you are. You know, what's the 6-week Italy trip, and why can't I go on a 6-week Italy trip? I would love one of those. So he goes on to tell them that she was successful, well-educated, well-loved. She had recently switched careers and was actually training to be an international travel guide. So that kind of explains why she was spending some time in Italy. So a little bit about her upbringing. She grew up on a small dairy farm in Central California, went to UC Davis, where she graduated with honors. So she was a smart girl. After grad school, where she was studying pharmacy, she would begin, just a pretty successful career as a pharmacist. So she didn't marry until she was 38, and met Peter in 1996. She had moved out to the area after accepting a job at a hospital in Reno, still working as a pharmacist, still working in pharmaceuticals. And they actually got married just a few months after meeting. Crazy, in my opinion. So Bergna told officers that this was not his first marriage. This was his second marriage. He had one that ended some, 20 years earlier after counseling was not able to resolve their differences. He did say that he and Renette had never actually tried counseling. A big disagreement that they had that he mentioned was about children, which is, I think, a pretty common disagreement between husband and wives, especially at the age of 38. Renette, the adventurer, always traveling, didn't necessarily want children. Peter, on the other hand, worked for a large auction and art appraisal company and also had a pretty well-established career. Their house was decorated with fine antiques, cellars stocked with bottles of wine. Very nice, were able to travel together, just overall had a pretty comfortable lifestyle. He was a coach at the local high school, and Renette, a devout Catholic, sang in the church choir. Picture perfect marriage, just like we love them.
Seems like a nice home life for those two, but I imagine not having kids can be a big... that's probably something you should figure out before you get married, weeks after you meet. I feel like that'd be a top priority item.
Yes. Yeah, I have a feeling that Renette's career change might have probably given into that when she switched from like pharmaceuticals to wanting to be in travel. I feel like she probably was just like, I don't want children.
Yeah, that's a pretty big signal that you're not ready to settle down and be a mommy.
But yeah, so Peter's also from California, son of a longtime six-term district attorney, Louis Bergna. Louis will come up a little bit later in the story, so just wanted to make sure we had him out on the table. So next, police are asking Peter if Renette had ever been to this spot that Peter had decided to take her on this fateful night. So it was an interesting response to this question. She had been around the mountain, but he wouldn't explicitly say like this spot. Now he was saying that he had been there before, but he didn't know exactly where she had gone, or that she had been there before, but didn't know where she had gone. So the police wrap up the questioning and then ask Bergna if he will take a lie detector test, and he agrees. Again, this man is a yes man.
Has he asked for a lawyer yet?
Interesting.
Just curious.
He has not at this point.
Well, I guess he's not being charged with anything, but if you could ask to take a lie detector test, you should probably ask to be lawyered up pretty soon.
I think he was like trying to make a point to himself and everyone else that he just like didn't need a lawyer. He wasn't guilty, so in his mind.
Yeah.
So polygraph tests are actually not allowed in Nevada courts, which I didn't know, and I thought that was pretty interesting. But the police, due to just his story and kind of like his mixing up of the spot thing and his behavior, they wanted to do one anyways. So if the test showed that he was lying, it would justify, really making him a suspect. Because at this point, they didn't want to just go full guns in, like it's this guy. So I think they were planning on using this as leverage into like really opening up the case into Peter.
So do they suspect foul play in this thing? Is that why they're like hounding him so hard? Or were they interviewing him as like standard procedure and then they're like, this guy's kind of suspicious?
The latter. So I don't think that they're, quick to make any assumptions about Peter. It seems like Peter is well regarded in the community. His wife is well regarded in the community. His father was a district attorney. I just don't think that their immediate thought was foul play. I think that this is all procedural at this point.
Okay.
But the polygraph is definitely,
definitely not normal.
Yeah, I think him coming back and asking for his fanny pack and not really caring about his wife was a little weird.
Yeah.
So he takes the polygraph. The examiner instructs him to breathe normally, but the whole test, Peter's not really, but like, you know what I mean? Peter's just breathing extremely heavily, like kind of in a non-normal way. And so because of this, the test is actually inconclusive.
If I was getting a polygraph, it doesn't matter if I'm like, if I'm guilty or if I'm innocent, I'm going to be freaking out. Like, I'm going to be panting.
That's my smart friend. So let's not forget, Louis, his father, 6-term district attorney. Some are wondering if, or not some, but it's fair to wonder if his father had counseled his son. And I think the police are a little bit skeptical of this as well.
Yeah, I guess that's an option. So
after this, the police are obviously even a little bit more suspect, and they ask him to come back for, another interview the next day. To their surprise, Peter agrees. So he's still on this yes man grind. He even agrees again to do it without a lawyer or his father in the room. So he returns and they start asking him about his relationship with his wife. And so Peter goes into this whole thing saying, I've never cheated on my wife. Never cheated on my first wife. And when we were going through a divorce, I could have gone out if the usual. I could have gone out if I wanted to, and I didn't do that. I stayed home. I don't go out. I don't hit the bars. I'm not looking for women. I stay home, and that gets someone like myself very lonely.
Okay.
Weird flex.
Yeah.
Then he abruptly changes direction in the story. And this is where it kind of, again, gets kind of strange. So he happened to be at a party the night before Renette was returning home from Italy.
I thought he didn't go out.
And apparently he tells his friends... great point. That's this vision of himself that I think he's trying to produce. So again, he goes back on kind of what he was saying, and he tells his friends at the party, don't call me for the next 2 days. I want to get laid. I love sex. I love my wife. I love to touch my wife. That's what I wanted to do. And so then he kind of turns to the police and he says, like, you know, that's what I wanted to do when she got home. I just wanted to have sex with her. I even thought about doing it on the top of a mountain. I came real close. My wife would have freaked out. I knew that, so she was not about it. I was going to bring up the towels and the lotions and the whole thing. We'll talk for a while and we'll work some things out and so forth and make love on the mountain. To me, it would be fabulous. To her, no. She wanted to go home and do it at home. She wanted to go home and do it at home. Burden aside and said it once more. She wanted to go home and do it at home. So that was quite
strange. Well, so maybe that's what was in the fanny pack, that he was so desperate to get back. But like, if you know your wife is not going to be into that, what is this whole like walk through your fantasy plan even about? But maybe he was rushing to get home and he didn't slow down on the turn.
Yes, and I just think like the repeating, she wanted to go and do it at home like 3 times. Like he was not that stuck with him that she wanted to go home and do it. Yeah. So then they ask him, you know, her death was not deliberate on your part. Like you didn't, you know, she wasn't intentionally killed. And so without flinching, he responds, not in any way, form, or fashion, full of confidence. And so I think here is where he starts to pick up on them kind of like hedging in on him and getting a little bit accusatory. And so he immediately kind of like flips the script and gets a little testy and says, you know, I'm being treated like a criminal here. All my friends are telling me like, go get an attorney, you know, whatever. And he's like, back off. Like, I don't need an attorney. I didn't do anything wrong. I loved my wife. I wanted to take her home and seduce her. Sue me. Yeah. I've admitted to nothing, you know, I did nothing wrong. I did nothing wrong. You guys think I'm guilty. I know for a fact. I know that, and it's obvious. You guys think that since I loved my wife, I killed my wife. I loved my wife, and that's all there is to it.
Is this even a murder case yet?
Yeah, I
like,
don't know.
Why are, like, I'm confused why they're even, like...
They're just asking if it was, like, anything deliberate. I don't think that they're really... Like, I think, like, all they did was just ask that question, and then he decided to kind of take it and say, like...
Y'all are trying to say I killed
But
him.
What I do think is interesting...
But he needs to listen to his friends.
Yeah.
He's got some good friends. Go get a lawyer, King.
Then he kind of continues to justify, like, why he wouldn't kill his wife, saying that, you know, they had just spoken on the mountain, and that she had agreed that she was going to stay home, you know, maybe hang out with him for a couple weeks, you know, cut the travel for a little bit. And he says, she was making me happy. Why would I want to kill her now? It doesn't make any sense to me. I was not going to be home alone anymore because she was going to stay, you know, which was what he really feared. And now he's alone at home. The one thing that he did not want this whole time was to be alone. And now he's alone and he does not understand. And the interview ends with Peter's anger just kind of growing further and further. He speaks to his father in private for a few minutes, and then he returns to the interview room for more.
Yeah, I understand, I guess. Like, that's really sad to have your wife leave this whole time, but I don't know, he was really harping really hard on, like, how morally superior it was of him to not have a social life, but maybe he should be going out more if he's so lonely. But I don't know. I'm not gonna judge him for that, because we all feel like that, you know? We all get lonely.
I think like the lonely thing is weird. I think, you know, grown man talking to grown man in this questioning room, and him just wah wah wah, like, I'm lonely. Before my wife died, I was lonely. Now my wife's dead. I'm lonely. Like, I guess maybe that's kind of harsh, but his wife's dead, and like either way, like, he was driving the car. So,
and he's
and like maybe it wasn't his fault. Who knows?
Instead of expressing sorrow for his wife being gone, he seems to be more sad about how lonely it's making him feel. doesn't, I guess, yeah, upon thinking about it, that's not
Yes.
the most expected grief response.
So Peter returns from speaking with his father in private for a few minutes, and whatever his father said to him seemed to kind of bring him back into the room with a new attitude. He immediately apologizes to the officers, saying that he was wrong. And then he says, there are some things I do know about the truck. I know I did something wrong up there.
So he said he
this
did
is
something
like,
is he alluding that something is wrong with the car that he was driving?
says I did something wrong.
Ooh,
So
I don't like that.
but it's like there are some things I do know about the truck as well. So it's like, whoa.
What is he apologizing to the cops for
Yeah.
his attitude?
His attitude, yeah. He was getting very like angry and just talking when he was talking about being alone. So he continues, we get a little bit of clarity, and he says he didn't do what he could have done to stop the vehicle. Whether I was hitting the gas pedal or the brake, I don't know. I can't tell you. Do I feel like I did something wrong? Damn right I feel like I did something wrong. I know I did something wrong. Did I do it on purpose? There's no way in hell I'd do anything on purpose up there. So
I feel like I can understand a sense of like feeling guilty that like, I mean, survivor's guilt, you survived and your wife died, and like maybe in a moment of panic he accidentally did step on the gas pedal, or think that he did in retrospect. Like the memory is faulty. I can understand feeling guilty that you survived and not translating into maybe I did something that led to my wife's death. It's hard not to feel like that when you're the driver of the car and someone died.
To me, it feels like he's almost justifying the philosophy of, judging an action based off of its intention rather than its outcome. Like, I feel like he's trying to say, like, yeah, maybe I did something wrong, but I didn't mean for that to happen. I just, like, it's almost like an interesting justification. They then, kind of go back to the conversation with his wife when they were sitting up there to begin with. They're curious about that. And he says that the conversation was peaceful. And then he kind of seems to go back on this and say that it actually started to get loud at some times. There were some disagreements. He was having a really hard time being at home for 6 weeks straight with her new travel schedule. And, he says that even with this, he doesn't care how bad it gets at home. You don't kill anybody. And you just don't do that, he says. Did I do something wrong on the hill up there? You bet I did. I killed my wife. I did something wrong with the driving. I made a mistake. But I can't tell you if I was hitting the brake or the gas pedal. I don't know. I don't remember. Am I guilty? Do I feel like I'm guilty? I feel like I'm guilty. Yes, I feel like I did something wrong. There's no question about that. Whoa. Yeah, so
I mean,
you bet I did. I killed my wife.
I feel like that's a mix of like what both of what we were saying. It's like, yes, he's gonna feel guilty because maybe he didn't mean to kill his wife, but at the end of the day, a result of his action is that his wife is now dead. So it's still, we still don't know. Like, he feels guilty, and in a way, it is his fault because he was driving the car. So I don't know how. That is kind of crazy to admit to the police. Yeah, I killed my wife.
Yes, and I think when I was like first kind of diving into this case, I was thinking that too. I was like, even if this was, say, like, something happened with the vehicle, he was driving and he just was going a little too fast. Like, no matter what, he technically did kill his wife. Even if like there was a fluke accident, like in any way you spin this, there was no one in the car that like, came in and decided to kill his wife. Like, he did physically drive the car that led to her death, unless like someone decided to come in and mess with something, but he did do it. So I think that's what he's kind of coming to the realization is like, no matter what way you spin the situation, even if it was not intentional, he was the one who killed her. with this
Yeah,
car.
but I wonder if like that
Um,
carries some implication of like, I don't know, like obviously he's responsible because he was driving a car, but like accidents happen when you're driving heavy machinery all the time. I think we forget, because we drive cars all the time, how dangerous it actually is. So it could very easily, I don't know, turn into an accident where like he's the one that's responsible because he's driving, but at the end of the day, it's not really anyone's fault. But I don't know. It is weird. It's a very strange thing to say. Did I do something wrong up there? Absolutely, I did. Like, I don't know.
Did I kill my wife? Yeah.
That's a crazy thing to say.
As we continue, the police point out to Bergna that his account does not match the scene of the accident. There is nothing to show anything. There's no attempt to turn, no attempt to stop. There's nothing in the roadway, nothing that would indicate that, you know, something came up that caused him to drive off the side of this mountain. So Peter responds to this by saying, you know, if what you're saying is that I would have jumped down onto the pavement, I'd be scratched up, bruised, everything else hitting that pavement, whatever speed I was going at, there's no way. Listen to the 911 tape. I'm yelling for my wife. I'm in pain. I'm screaming for my wife.
My car's went down the hill. My wife in the car. We're not.
And the interview ends. So he's basically arguing that, you know, he wasn't scratched up as we discussed in the beginning. So there's no way that he could have dove out of the window. But we're still not really clear as to like how he got from point A to point B.
Yeah, if he didn't dive out of the window, how did he get out? Does he have an explanation for how he got out of the car and she didn't? Like, if he didn't dive out of the car, how did this happen?
He doesn't have an explanation that it all happened so fast, and he has lack of understanding. Like the car, I mean, when a car is spinning out of control at that speed or whatever speed they were going at, hard to understand what's going on all at once. But there was still no hard evidence that Bergna had actually murdered his wife. There were no witnesses, no confession, no conclusive physical evidence at the scene, and the investigators really needed time to recover and thoroughly inspect the F-150. And the guardrail and the markings on the road could not be matched to the truck. And, you know, all of this was taking weeks or months to do. So his behavior during all of this and the inconsistencies in his story had eventually convinced police that he was a suspect in his wife's murder. But they had decided to, you know, back off for a little bit and let forensic evidence come to focus, because at the end of the day, they would not be able to convict him without this hard truth. So this strategy kind of got off to a bumpy start, relying on the forensic evidence. So the medical examiner was unable to determine Renette's actual cause of death. She had 13 broken ribs, a broken kneecap, a broken wrist. She'd also been bleeding in the brain, had a broken neck. You know, there was no way to tell if she had been killed prior to the crash and then somehow sent off the road down the mountain. The timeline was unclear. I mean, when you're thrown off the side of the mountain, I feel like it's pretty difficult to establish what happened.
There's not going to be a lot left to put the pieces together, I guess. Oh, God, that's awful.
Exactly. However, they were able to determine that the car was in very good condition. The car was kept up. Whatever had happened to cause the crash was not due to faulty brakes, was not due to steering. And they also had concluded that there was no significant history of brake problems with this model through checking with the Ford Motor Company. Meanwhile, by all reports, Peter Bergna is acting like an innocent man tortured by his wife's violent death in a car crash.
I don't know, I'm hung up on all those injuries that she had. I am thinking though, if she had been murdered before, would all of those injuries been able to like happen if she had already been dead? Do you know what I mean? Like the internal bleeding, can you still bleed internally once you've already died? Like, I feel like that would be if in the hypothetical world you did kill your wife, I guess sending her off the side of the mountain in a car is a pretty good way to cover that up.
Definitely. So At the same time that this is all going on, we have to think about Renette's family. I know we discussed that Renette's also born and raised in California on a small dairy farm, had a good relationship with her family. Initially, Bergna's kind of staying on good terms with Renette's family. Even as they're kind of growing a little bit more suspicious of him, he makes it his mission to like really, stay in touch with them, stay in their good graces, they're mourning together. So when Renette's younger brother, Richard, asks him about the circumstances of the accident, Peter tells him essentially what he told the police. And so Peter tells Richard that he wants Renette to be buried in Incline Village where they live. And Richard doesn't really like this idea. He says, Peter, look, why don't you let us bring Renette home? We'll bury her next to Mom and Dad. And then he suggests that when Peter felt better, that they could, have a memorial service back at Incline with all of the friends that are there, but keep her buried in her real home. Peter agrees to this plan, and so the funeral service in California happens 2 weeks after the crash. Peter wears his sunglasses, sits apart from the Rhea family, and as people were filing into the church, Renette's relatives were kind of reluctant to embrace him, as most would. The terms and circumstances of what happened are still up in the air. He's sitting in the corner with his sunglasses on. And Richard actually goes up to Peter and tells him to leave. So, things are starting to get a little bit tense with the family. Peter didn't have his friends at this. It was just Renette's family. So when he goes back to the service in Incline Village, Peter's, totally different. It's like night and day. He feels much more comfortable, much more relaxed around these people. However, investigators find that at least one guest in attendance at the service found his behavior to be a little bit disturbing that day. So Kendra St. John, Renette's first boss at the tour guide company that she had started working for, had flown in from the East Coast for the service. She saw Peter at the luncheon after the service. She said she gave him a big hug, said she was sorry, felt familiar with him to a degree enough to, really express her heartfelt condolences and just feeling bad about the accident. St. John recalled seeing Bergna and some of his male friends, outside smoking cigars at the reception, just kind of in a guy circle, if you may. And it seemed very casual to her. She said there wasn't a whole lot of emotion or grief visible. And as the reception kind of started to wind down, St. John mentioned to Bergna that she needed to fax some immigration documents for work and to see if he had any suggestions. Bergna had been running his own business and, was familiar with kind of the ins and outs of things like this. Peter informed her that they had a fax machine in the basement at the office at his house and insisted that they return there. So as they walk out to go to her rental car, she notices the cast on his foot and asks how he's doing. Bergna says, "It's really not that bad. I wish I'd been hurt worse. I wish I'd broken my neck." Poor guy.
Poor fella.
St. John thought it was odd that Bergna didn't reference Renette when St. John was like, "Oh, how does it feel? Like, how are you?" He didn't even mention Renette.
Yeah, I guess maybe he's just another weird guy. Thought she was just talking about his boo-boo foot, and didn't think to.
But she thought this was weird enough.
Yeah, it is strange.
But yeah, you're right. I mean, it could he could be like, okay, finally someone's asking about me.
Yeah.
Okay. So they get to the house for the fax machine and they're discussing a mutual friend that's a soccer coach, and Peter actually puts his arm around St. John and says, if you ever need a place to stay in Incline Village, come out and visit. Stay as long as you want. You're always welcome here. You always got a home here. St. John suddenly felt very uncomfortable by this. She sent out the fax and headed to the airport. She was familiar with Renette, but was not familiar with Peter.
That's really awkward and weird.
What does this make you kind of think about?
Yeah. Well, I mean, he's told us time and time again he's a lonely guy, and if his wife just died, he's probably extra lonely, and he caught a vibe in this basement and decided to, I don't know, put his arm around her, throw out the line, see if he caught any fish.
Yeah, well,
Maybe it was just that is so creepy though, especially like your wife just died, you just had her memorial service, and her boss is in your basement, and you decide to like put your arm around her. Like that's nasty. Like I would be so uncomfortable.
Yeah. So
but he could just be he's just a man.
Yeah. Exactly. He's just a man. Peter's a dog. And so unfortunately, patterns kind of start emerging, as they usually do. When there's smoke, there is fire, especially when it comes to men who don't know physical boundaries. So on the night before, kind of in another account, on the night before Renette flew back from Italy, Peter went to a surprise 40th birthday party for a friend at a Mexican restaurant in town. He met this woman named Brenda Riedel Harge, who was there with a friend, Audrey Tudor. Brenda chatted with Brenda, asking her if she was married or if she had any children. She told him she wasn't married, but that she had 2 children. When Brenda left to go get the birthday girl, Bergna started chatting up Audrey. He was telling me about the art collection he had because of his business, that he appraised art, and everyone was telling me how fabulous it was. Audrey Tudor recalled, so he invited me to come see it. They had some time before the surprise, and Bergna lived nearby, so, you know, they shimmied on over to his house, where he showed off his art collection in the living room, and then took her downstairs to show her his wines. Audrey remembers that towards the end of this brief visit, I felt like he was pretty close. He looked me in the eye just a little too long. And it made her feel uncomfortable because it felt like he was too interested in her. They returned to the party, which later moved to a dance club. There, Audrey says, Bergna asked if she would go out to dinner with him. She said no, because you're married. So Audrey was aware that he was married. But Bergna wouldn't quit. He followed her to the dance floor, tried to dance with her. Audrey actually had to ask a friend to run interference to keep Bergna away from her. Bergna left the club alone that night.
Good.
So
Great.
Without, yes, lonely man, yes. And let's just dive into another account where, a Wells Fargo executive that had known Bergna through work for a number of years told investigators that in the first or second week of May, while Renette was away in Europe, God, he was going crazy while she was in Europe, Bergna asked him about a woman that he had met at a work event named Janet Mello, who was a senior credit officer. So Bergna had met Mello and wanted to know if Mello happened to be married or was seeing anybody, because he was considering asking her out on a date. The man didn't want to have anything to do with this, politely declined, and said that if he wanted to ask her out, he could do it himself. Less than a month after Renette died, Bergna did just that. He called Mello at her office and invited her to the movies. She had heard that Bergna's wife had just died in an accident, thought it was extremely odd, and turned down the invitation. So, man was lonely and was
wow, what a dog.
lonely.
I love how he keeps asking if all these women are married to see if they're available or not when he is also married. So why clearly you have no respect for the institution of marriage. Why does it matter if they're
It's
married?
so interesting. It's interesting how that's like the first question that he keeps asking all these women, and just decides to leave out. And also 1 month after, like, Incline Village is giving me like small social scene vibe. I don't know what this man thinks, like, just popping around. Like, people talk, girls talk,
especially in a small town. The gossip train is quick, and you will get called out when you're doing stuff like that. You'll get eaten up and spat out.
Unfortunately, there's more. There's more encounters with these women, and so the next one is with our gal Brenda.
Back to Brenda.
Yes. Oh yes, we are back to Brenda. So Brenda, just to reiterate, was at the birthday party and was friends with Audrey and introduced basically Audrey and Bergna. So around the same time, Bergna hobbled in to Brenda Riedel-Harge's office. I just have this like image of this like man just like slobbering into like this office, just like looking for a woman. Please,
just dragging his peg leg behind him.
Fill my void. So he gets to Brenda's office at a bank in Incline Village and starts telling her about the accident. The accident where he lost his wife. He describes how his brakes gave out and he was sent out of the window of the truck. Brenda recalls that he not once said anything about missing Renette or even just being sad about her passing. She did recall him complaining that the police had taken up a bunch of her time. He told her that he had asked his wife for a divorce several times, but that she didn't want to go through with it because she didn't want to admit that she had failed at something. So this is what he's saying about Lynette.
That does not sound like a man who loves his wife.
Yeah. So Bergna then decides it's appropriate to ask Brenda if she and her daughter would like to come over to his house for dinner, take a look at his art collection, and have a soak in his hot tub.
Ew.
Brenda agrees. Okay. No judgment, Brenda.
Each their own.
Brenda also is a single mother. Brenda also... Yes, let's not forget Brenda has a child and no husband. So, Brenda's also on her own. Bergna grills some steaks, opens some wine, puts on the whole show. I can see it now. Mm-hmm. After dinner, Brenda's daughter wanted to watch the videos she had brought with her. When Bergna turned on the TV, the Playboy channel comes on. Bergna then looks at Brenda, who then says, "Well, I have needs too."
Ew. How old is his daughter?
So Bergna and Brenda
had this creep's house.
And this is all happening less than a month after Renette dies. So keep that in mind. This is less than a month after his wife has died.
Men are trash.
So, trash. So Bergna and Brenda head to the hot tub, where the host then suggests that she moves in a little closer and says, you can see the stars better from over here. Like, what is this, middle school? Like oh, look, it's a shooting star.
Oh, this is giving me heebie-jeebies, Haley.
I know, it's like, ugh, like, this man is acting like a 16-year-old, I don't even know.
Sleazeball.
Yeah, and he slides over next to her anyways. He puts his arm around her and immediately grabs her breast. She tells him to stop. He gets mad, asks her what's wrong. Brenda tells him she wants to go home. She gathers her daughter, who I assume hopefully is not in the frickin' hot tub, and heads to her car. Before she could leave, Bergna pulled out Renette's golf clubs and put them in the trunk of Brenda's car. You might as well use them if your daughter's learning how to golf.
What?
Shouldn't these go to the family, Brenda asked? Bergna told her that he wanted to start getting rid of Renette's things.
Oh, I'm like getting whiplash. So he assaults her in the bathtub, or in the hot tub, and then tries to give her some golf clubs and like act like nothing happened. That is insane.
For her daughter. And the golf clubs, they're not just golf clubs, they're Renette's golf clubs.
God.
And this is less than a month after she has died.
I don't like this man. I do not like this man.
Yeah, and he says he's trying to get rid of Renette's things, and it's been less than a month.
I mean, move on. And let's remember. Like, process your grief however you want to process your grief, but he is such a sleazeball. I do not like him.
Such a sleazeball. No, such a sleazeball. Well, and let's not forget, Mary Margaret. This is the same man. He looked police in the eyes and said, "I don't go out. I don't hit the bars. I'm not looking for women. I stay home."
I've never cheated on
Yeah,
my wife.
and these
Meanwhile,
3
that's because
accounts.
no one has ever said yes to you cheating on your wife. It's not for lack of trying. Oh my God.
Exactly. And one of these events happened before his wife died, and 2 of them after, which is just despicable, but I won't comment any further. So as months pass, Bergna seems to be communicating with police less and less. Phone calls to Bergna from investigators that were promptly returned in the wake of her death were now going unreturned, not really hearing from him. Friends were also seeing less from him around town. So they actually learn, the police actually learn that 4 months after his wife died, Bergna actually strikes up a relationship with another bank executive, Robin Russell, who lived in Seattle. Russell would later tell reporters he had just lost his wife, I just turned 40, and I wasn't really looking for marriage. We both just needed a friend. He mourns the death of his wife deeply and misses her terribly, but he needs to move on, and that's kind of what she wanted to be there for. So Bergna and Russell go on vacation to Hawaii, where he proposes to her, and they set a wedding date for February, but broke off their relationship sometime right before then. In late spring of '99, investigators learned that Bergna has moved to Seattle, completely gone from the village, and is now living with Robin Russell. So it's time for the police to cut to the chase and move to make some arrests. Time has passed. Bergna has fully exited the premises and already moved on with another woman. And so on November 15th of 2000, the grand jury indicts Bergna on murder charges. They gather enough evidence to indict him on murder charges. 2 days later, he's arrested in Seattle and jailed. And this is November 17th of 2000. And his attorney actually assures him things are in his favor because it took so long for them to bring charges upon him that they probably were just kind of grasping at straws at this point for any sort of evidence or proof. It just didn't seem like they had much of a case going. So on November 29th, just like a week and a half later, Bergna pleads not guilty to the charges. And in the meantime, while this is all going on, Bergna's father, the six-term attorney, dies playing golf. He's on the golf course and has a heart attack. And so this is pretty important because if you recall, Lewis was kind of his legal guidance, was kind of helping him, giving him step by step. So this definitely broke him down. So shortly after his father's death, on October 1st of 2001, Bergna tells the press, I've waited for extremely long for my day in court to tell my side of the story. It's been over 2.5 years at this point. Long time, and Bergna feels like he hasn't gotten his side out and that he's been pegged as the person that did this to his wife. He says he's an innocent man, he's humble, but confident. And it's important that the truth comes out now and that people hear the whole story, not just what they want to make up. Because obviously with 2.5 years, a lot of stories can start to get spun up. The state admits, as we discussed before, it took an extremely long time for them to gather the amount of evidence that they did have. The state honestly eventually admits that much of the case is circumstantial. They didn't have a confession, they said, and they didn't have a statement from the victim or any eyewitnesses. So as, Bergna was kind of expecting, the case was based off of lots of circumstantial evidence.
Yeah, it's pretty fun.
As they went into this trial. And so both sides planned to call in engineers and investigators to reconstruct the accident, but it still only left one eyewitness, which was Peter. So the trial eventually occurs in October of 2001, over 2 years after Renette's death. The prosecutor contends that Bergna was frustrated with his wife for being gone for weeks at a time as an international tour guide, as we were talking about. Bergna, however, maintains that he really loved his wife and the crash was just a horrible, tragic accident. So we'll kind of break it down a little bit to make it, in court terms, a little bit easier to understand. But what the defense would show is that overall the crash was an accident. The brakes failed while he attempted to negotiate a sharp left turn on the curve of the road. He lost control of the truck, which then veered on the right and broke the guardrail and went down the mountain. He was ejected from the truck through the closed driver's side window. He ends up 80 feet below the road after being tossed down the mountain, and he was unaware that the truck with his wife inside ended up 800 feet below the highway. So he had fallen out and wasn't even aware of where the car had gone. And on the alternate, the prosecution would show that the crash was actually staged by Bergna. He intentionally steered the truck towards the guardrail. Tests found that no mechanical defects were found with the vehicles and the brakes. He then jumped from the vehicle before it hit the guardrail. So they're still kind of running with this theory that he did jump out of this vehicle, just due to, I think, some of his, minimal injuries. But there is this difference between him jumping and being ejected from the vehicle, because the defense will say that he was ejected out of the vehicle without any kind of control. And obviously the prosecution will say that he strategically was able to jump out of that window. The prosecution will continue to show that he intentionally slid 80 feet down the mountain and then called 911 because dirt marks were found on the rear of his pants, and that's inconsistent with someone that would say tumble down a mountain would have dirt all over themselves. It was more so that he just kind of slid down. After kind of giving a general overview of what the prosecution and defense would show, the trial really kicks off, and each of the women that Bergna flirted with that we discussed earlier would testify in an attempt to show the extent of the problems within the Bergna marriage and to undermine the defendant's credibility. An evidence preservation expert testified for the defense that the truck wreckage had stood outside in the weather too long. And another expert had showed how the truck had sideswiped the guardrail and bounced over the top of a wooden post, ejecting Bergna. The same expert offered that particles from the airbag found on Bergna's clothing were consistent with the possibility that he had been in the truck when the airbag inflated, placing him inside the truck when it actually hit the guardrail. That way he wasn't, out of there before there was any sort of impact.
So is the prosecution suggesting that he jumped out of the car before it even hit the guardrail and then slid down on his butt down to the thing?
Yes, that is what the prosecution and the defense is they're using these experts essentially to set the scene for him being inside the truck when it actually hit the rail. There was no ejection. He was there and just somehow magically got very lucky. A retired Arizona State University physics professor was used as another expert, and he used the marks on his clothing and shoes and a bent area of the molding on the side of the driver's side of the window to support the scenario that Bergna was ejected from the truck. Next, an expert in staged accidents testified that the markers typical of a staging were not present, and that his behavior was not expected of a man planning to kill his wife, whatever that may be. The defense's final expert, using an animated rendering, demonstrated his account of the accident, indicating exactly how the truck had caught the guardrail post and twisted around at a 50-degree angle. So this is the way that they were able to demonstrate to the court that it was not intentionally staged and that it was just a natural accident. So then for several days, character witnesses took the stand to discuss how distraught Bergna was after Renette's death. Okay, so then Bergna's lawyers played portions of the 911 call for the jury and asked, does this sound like it's coming from the monster that the prosecution is trying to portray Mr. Bergna as?
My car's moved down the hill. My wife is in the car. Renette!
Is he really this cunning killer, the cold-blooded murderer, a man who had plotting for weeks or maybe months to kill his wife? Like we discussed earlier in that 911 call, he was clearly out of it, repeating things over and over again. My wife. And they're really trying to say, how could that be someone that could murder his wife? So by the time that the defense had rested, it was actually Peter Bergna who appeared to be the victim, having little to gain and a lot to risk by staging an accident the way prosecution alleged. Bergna was never called to testify.
They do a lot in murder cases. They don't call the defendant to the stand because it can, very easily go south. I think that's pretty normal to not call the defendant to the stand.
So 3 weeks into the trial, the jury was driven to the accident site to see it themselves. which is I thought was super interesting. Imagine like being a juror during all of this. Super interesting. Yeah, field trip. Literally like everyone pile in the van. So they were instructed to say nothing as they looked over the precipice and saw a yellow flag 700 feet below, which is where the car had crashed. They also saw the spot 80 feet down where Bergner had claimed to have come to arrest. Bergner was actually there as well, conferring just a short distance away with his attorneys, which I thought was also interesting. So Renette's brother actually took 6 weeks off of work to sit in the courtroom as his sister's personal representative. He was joined by the other siblings and relatives on many days of the testimony. So the reason for doing this is he wanted the jury to see that he had a family there that really cared for her. And he said that sometimes when they make a decision, they're thinking of a pickup or an inanimate object. She was not an inanimate object. That was my sister. She was a good person. You know, I wanted to just get her day in court. And so after 6 weeks, both sides were finally done. The jury was instructed and sent off to deliberate. On the 7th day of deliberations, the four women sent a note to the judge. We are at a standstill. The vote is 9-3, and no one is willing to budge. So the judge told the courtroom that the jury was hung and declared a mistrial. 8 women and 1 man wanted to convict Bergner, while 2 men and 1 woman remain convinced of his innocence.
I don't know, because I really do not like him. I think he's a sleazeball and a trash human and really creepy and all of those good things, but I don't really think that there's like enough information for us to say that this happened on purpose. It is interesting that there's like there's nothing going on with the truck, but like, I don't know. I feel like we've all been in situations where you feel like you might lose control of the car. You don't really know what's going on. And if you're driving on a dangerous road, that can very easily turn into an accident happening. And just because he's like a sleazeball creep, maybe bad husband, like that doesn't mean he's a murderer. Just like, again, I feel like there's not enough information for you to know one way or the other. Like you can't put him in jail for murder just because he's a creep. Even if I wish you could. Yeah,
and I think it's difficult, as we said before, like there's no witnesses. The only person that was there was Peter. So it's like we're only getting like at least a story out of him. That's the only thing they have to run on. I mean, you can make all of these renderings and these animations, but in real life, there's only there's 3 sides to the story. But
I'm curious what's going on with the fanny pack if they ever found it.
So Bergner is happy about the kind of ending to this. I mean, obviously not fully ideal, but as it's declared as a mistrial, he gets to go home, especially on Thanksgiving. He says, super excited. This has been a very difficult year for me, and I'm looking forward to putting my life back together. So Bergner actually remains accused of murder in his wife's death, but was free on a $750,000 bail as prosecutors decided whether to put him on trial again. He and his family posted the bond, which included the deed to his $550,000 Incline Village house and $100,000 in cash. So they were able to front it. Lucky him. Bergner, 48, was released from jail, so he's 48 at this time, and he's forced to relinquish his passport. So eventually, there is a retrial in May 10th of 2002, and the retrial was just that. Many of the same witnesses making the same exact testimony. Multiple expert witnesses testifying on both sides, just as we went through earlier. And the prosecution rolled out their full lineup of women that testified about Bergner's advances on them. The jury took a field trip up the mountain. The defense tried to poke holes in the prosecution's admittedly circumstantial case. And by the time they had rested, each side had played just one significant new card. And we'll get into them. I do think it's very interesting that everything else was essentially the same, and it's a lot of time and taxpayer dollars. So Bergner's lawyers actually accused the Ford Motor Company of covering up a history of brake problems with their pickups, like the one involved in the crash. The company official said that there's no record of brake troubles with the Ford F-150 truck and suggested that defense attorneys were just trying to shift the blame. So the prosecution calls Bergna's first wife, Rebecca Tillery, to the stand. And she comes out with this statement saying, "I was very, very fearful of my physical well-being." Tillery, who had been married to Bergna for 3 years, recounted how Bergna was able to put forth this facade of this like affable guy, you know, friendly guy. But once the door was closed, she says, "I found that there was a totally different person." She testified that on the second night of their honeymoon, Bergna went berserk because she cooked his hash browns the wrong way. I was in shock. He was going on and on. He was so angry at me.
God.
What do you think about?
Well, I'm a big hash brown girl. I can understand the anger over some subpar hash browns, but that would be so scary to be newly married to someone and see them just go off the handle over something that's so insignificant. Yeah, over hash browns.
I'm
That's
also
insane.
interested in like why they didn't interview her the first time around or
Yeah,
bring her to
very
the stand
true.
the first time around. I'm wondering if maybe she was reluctant and needed to be like persuaded. I don't know. So when the 6-week retrial finally ended, a jury of 8 women and 4 men found Bergna guilty of murder. They sentenced Bergna to life in prison with the possibility of parole. Jurors agreed that the crash was no accident, with specifically them saying, "What stood out in my mind was not just a single piece of evidence, but how much of it there was," said Shireen Pluman, 42, who works in a dental office in Sparks. Just your average Joe. That's what convinced us. Bergna's ejection through the open driver's side window raised eyebrows. Juror Mary Margaret said, "If you're ejected, you won't go out the window feet first," she said. "You would dig your hands up in a stop." It wasn't
You went out
easy,
feet
Kyra
first?
said. Yes, I think
How is
that's,
that even
yeah, she's
possible?
saying that you wouldn't go out.
Yeah. That's crazy. Huh.
Your guess is as good as mine. I mean, I think it would be interesting to really see like the dummy version of whatever they were trying to conjure up here, of
Yeah.
this person just like strategically like throwing their feet out the window.
Out the window. Yeah, I also, that is really suspicious. If someone was trying to convince me of that, I can't even picture that in my head.
Yeah, but I mean, it was hard for them. The deliberations were very emotional, and you have a man's life on the line at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So, you know, as we've talked about before, it's just tough. So, to the sentencing. So, Bergna was actually given the opportunity to address the court. He says, "Please believe me that I felt and still feel great sadness following the death of my friend and my wife. Not one day will ever go by or has gone by that I do not think about Renette and what she meant to me and my family. No matter if I spend the rest of my life in prison, I will always do the right thing. I will always do what is good. No matter where I go, not one day will ever go by that I don't think about my wife and what she meant to me and the Reyes. I will always love her."
There's a lot of me and I'm a good person, I promise, and that I don't really think is appropriate.
There's not a lot of also like, I really want to know what happened and how this happened. Why isn't he like, "Oh, I wish experts could find out why this happened to my wife," instead of blaming me? You know, like there isn't even any of that. It's like, I would just want to know, like, if it was the car, then like really like what was it? But he's not even really like alluding back to that. So I think that's interesting. So the jury of 8 women and 4 men deliberated for less than 2 hours before imposing the penalty of life behind bars with the possibility of parole after 20 years. When the sentence was announced, Bergna sobbed. The sentence capped years of investigations, 2 trials, and a string of appeals. Bergna was sent to a maximum security cell at Eli State Prison, and he was ordered to pay $281,900 in restitution to the family of Renette, including $6,900 to cover funeral costs. Robin Russell, Bergna's fiance, vowed to continue the legal battle, saying that he's an innocent man and will fight forever. His lawyers have said they plan to appeal to the Nevada Supreme Court. "I'm just relieved that there's some kind of closure," says Jack Rea, Renette's brother. "It's like heavy weight is off, and I think it's a relief for both families."
For his family too, that he's in prison?
Yes, I think that the Reyes were content with the way that this kind of all kind of fizzled out. Yeah. So to this day, Bergna is actually still in prison. He is 70 years old. He was recently denied parole just in March of 2021. So he is still serving out his sentence today.
Wow.
So, Mary Margaret, what are we thinking?
I don't know. I feel I feel like I'm just as confused as I was at the beginning. I think he's a sleazeball, but I don't know. I guess I'll trust the jury on this one. The reenactment must have really sold it. I don't know. I think he's suspicious and weird, but I don't know if he's a murderer. What do you think?
I think it's interesting that in their retrial, I'm still kind of hung up on the first wife deciding to come through, because in reality, that is kind of what pushed them, if you think about it. Yeah, so I think it's interesting. It definitely carried a lot of weight, and I think there's a difference between someone that he comes on to and someone that he was actually married to, because that was at first at least a consensual relationship. So she's seen his good and his evil. She hasn't just seen him being a sleazeball, and she can still say that yes, he has this good, but this man is root evil.
Not what you think. I don't know. That's crazy. I think I am still a little mystery to me.
I would vote definitely guilty on this one. I don't think that there's enough of a story to prove his innocence, and I think that all signs are kind of pointing towards he probably, in my opinion, I think he didn't like that she was leaving. He knew she wasn't going to change her lifestyle for him, and he just was forever going to be a lonely man, and just sad that he just thought that that would make him less lonely, because clearly it didn't work, because he just went out and started being creepy to people. So yeah, I say guilty.
Yeah, I don't know.
Anyways, thank you.
Thank you everyone for tuning in to this week's True Crime Murder Mysteries with Haley and Mary-Margret. Make sure you follow our Instagram and subscribe so you can be notified every time we post a new episode. And thank you, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah, and let us know what you thought about the case. And if there are any holes or questions that anyone has, we would love to continue the discussion beyond this session. But thanks again for watching, and like Mary Margaret said, like, subscribe, stay in the know with us, and we look forward to seeing you next time.